This talk originally was meant to be just about Elm Sketch product, but I decided to make it a bit wider and just talk about how we can use Elm and tools of Elm to help communicate with the other people we work with. So if you don't know who I am, then I'm this pink blob on the internet everywhere, by choice, not by accidental GitHub, but I'm known as UE56. I'm the owner of the Elm Slack and Elm community. I'm a contributor to all kinds of things, and I made all kinds of other stuff. I work at Shipstead with these people in Oslo. I used to work at Nordic, and before that I worked at Fusels, and before that I had my own company. So to get a rough idea of what you guys already know, how many people have written Elm? Okay, half.
What was the question?
How many people have written Elm before?
It's
written like okay, cool. So a bit more than half. Cool. Cool. How many of you are programmers? Okay, everyone. Okay, cool. No designers. Cool. Nice. So one of the important things that I think that I have to think about a lot in my roles in the open source community and in my day job is that communication is basically the majority of what I do. So in the open source community, then I'm communicating on Slack or communicating on PRs, or I'm discussing ideas with certain people. And then in my day job, I'm communicating with other developers, managers or designers or UX people. And I think it's a really important key of any good platform that you can be able to communicate your ideas successfully to other people. Otherwise, you end up with stuff like regex, where it's write once, read never. And so I think Elm can have an ecosystem which can really help you communicate with those other people. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. I scrolled down. So we're going to look at an example of what I had to do recently, which was make a way to share a news article. So in our application, we have mobile apps with news articles in, and we want to be able to share those news articles with people on Facebook. It should just be static HTML and CSS. All it is text that looks pretty with some images. The way that is generated is from JSON, from an article server. And this involved some colleagues. It wasn't just me. I had to talk to the other developers. I had to talk to the designer. I had to talk to our UX designer. Does everyone know what a UX designer is? I know some places don't really have them. Yeah? Does anyone not understand what a UX is? Okay.
Explain it anyway.
Explain
UX
it anyway.
design is one of those very overloaded terms.
Okay, yeah. So in this context, then our UX designer was the people who think about how a user is actually going to use your application and how they are going to interact with what you make. And then there's also the product people, but we're going to leave product out of this for now. So the designer, they mainly care about how something looks, right? So they should say, well, the background should be red, and you make it red, and then they change their mind and they say it should be green, so you change it back to green. It's pretty simple, but when you are working on an actual thing that they want you to make, you probably have a meeting where you look over their designs, you look over what they want you to make, and you say, okay, what about this, what about that? They might use a tool like Zeppelin, where they can export their design thing into something that you can consume a bit easier, or they might just use Photoshop or Sketch, depends whatever you guys use, I guess. And then once you've actually made it based on the meetings and the Zeppelin file or design, then you'll probably have a QA session where the designer will go through and say, this isn't what I wanted, or this isn't quite right, or this background color should be red, not green. And then you'll have to go back and revisit that and have more meetings and see more Zeppelin and have more QA. So the UX designer cares about how it interacts. accommodate for the screen size. But so they might say, we should have two buttons, one which says say hello, and one which says say bye. And when you click say bye, say hello, then it says hello. When you click say bye, then it should say bye. But if you click say bye after already saying bye, then it should say you can't say bye without saying hi. And then you go back to the start and do it all over again. And yeah. So again, with a UX person, then you need to have meetings to say how is the application going to work, how are people going to interact. They might use a tool called Envision, which allows you to mock up the events that happen on a page. So if a click happens, then what's the design that comes next? Once you've actually implemented, say, tabs or something like that, then you'll probably have another QA session where the UX person goes through and says, this tab shouldn't be highlighted when this tab is not highlighted, or something like that. And then you have more meetings, and then you go through Envision again, and then you go back to QA. So there's a bit of a pattern. When it comes to talking to developers, then you probably, the main thing that you are trying to figure out is how the thing that you're making now fits into the rest of your system. So if you're making this share article thing, then how does it fit into our existing article stuff? How does it fit in with our actual apps? How do people actually share it? So in this case, this little text field takes, folks, I have to refresh. Just takes in some stuff. So one of the examples of the bad matching data, this is a terrible UI, but bad matching data is when we're expecting a string, but instead we got a number. And when we're working with someone else's API, then we probably run into this in our heads constantly. Yeah. So the way we interact with developers is probably a little bit more richer than the way we interact with everyone else we interact with. We might have meetings, that's pretty standard, but we probably have pull requests. And pull requests have a lot of metadata. You can see what's changing, you can see what's happening, you can communicate asynchronously and see exactly what is changing instead of guessing what has changed, as the designers might do. You might have specs which say, okay, this is how our API works. You have to build something that works to this API, and that is something that you can actually test against. You might just get the API and reverse engineer stuff, but you will always have some way of testing the integration between the existing system and the thing you're making. But I hope you do. You might not, but I hope you do. So there's like this general pattern when you interact with anyone, when you're working together, when you're making something, is that first you kind of examine what you're going to make, you discuss it, you talk about it, you kind of drill down into what it is you're actually going to do and how other people can help you with that. Then you actually make it, and then you go back and talk to them again and say, is this right? Does this work the way it should? That's where the QA stuff comes in. And then once we've done our QA stuff, we go back and refine stuff again. And we go back to the start and examine and make and verify and refine. So the three main differences that I see between the way we interact between developers, developer to developer rather than developer to designer or UX designer, is that we have these tools where we can verify the code works by making tests. We can discuss changes very clearly visually via a diff. And we can kind of understand as we make something why something has to be a certain way. So if we have to make padding be 5 pixels instead of 10 pixels because Safari doesn't like it when things are 10 pixels, I don't know why that would be, but it seems likely, then we can kind of understand why we have to do that, because there might be a comment or it might explain in the pull request. But we don't have that same knowledge when it comes to communicating with designers, because they aren't looking at the code, they're looking at the output from the code. So, I don't know why that's highlighted, but I like to think that we can make tooling as a communication aid. So any tool that we have that allows us to take some stuff and do things with it can help us communicate better. To give that in a more illicit example, I guess, is that this is a pull request that someone made. I have no context on this pull request. I don't even know what it's for. Oh, I do actually, but I can pretend that I don't know what it's for. But I can clearly see the things that have changed, and I know that a new argument was added called make process ops, and I know that it's got a default here, and I can clearly see that change. But if I'm a designer and someone's changed the styles in the CSS, then I don't necessarily know that. I have to look through it very closely and to get the full context of what was made again, unless the developer very clearly says, I had to change the padding to 5 pixels. So first is this tool for developers called Elm Decoders. And the basic premise behind that is that if you are working by yourself, you can get a lot more done before you have to start communicating with other people. So one of the best ways to communicate with people is to only bring up the important points. If you are just always constantly bombarding people with questions, then there's more noise to signal. And so the more you can do by yourself, the less you have to go and say, hey, how should this work? How does this thing connect together? So how many people have written decoders with Elm before? Some. Okay. So a decoder in Elm is basically a way of turning JSON into something that is safely typed. So we might have a user with a name, or in this case, we might have a cat with some lives, for example. So if I do this, oops, if I do this and test that, then we can see that this went green, and we can see the number of lives. So this is the object that was created from this decoder. That just takes JSON and turns it into an actual representation in Elm. And then it goes through and finds the view function for something of that type and passes that object that was created into the Elm view function. The basic idea is that when you have a lot of data and a lot of decoders that might look like this, then you might not know what bit of data you've got. But if you can just paste in some JSON into here, and we can see that these two things pass, then we can instantly say, okay, I know what kind of data I'm dealing with, and you don't need to go and ask someone, hey, where is the spec for this? What is a text? What is a resource? How do I work with this thing? It's got paragraphs. I haven't seen it before. I don't know what I'm doing. So increasing autonomy to avoid excessive signal is one of the better ways that developers can learn to communicate with each other, I think, personally. So when I looked at Fuse Tools, their product is all about making tools for designers instead of developers. So they make a competitive tool to React Native and Xamarin, but instead of focusing on developer experience, they focus on designer experience. So the idea is that you have a visual tool which allows you to generate actual app native code that runs at 60 frames per second with animations and stuff in. And one of the cool things that I think has come out recently is that there's a Sketch API which allows you to look into the files. I think I said that too early. No, I didn't. Okay, good. So one of the things that can also help designers, especially that I saw at Fuse, was being able to have a live preview of the thing that they made inside their design tool in the actual environment. Meant that they didn't have to wait for the developers to deploy something. They didn't have to wait to see it on the actual app. They could just say, okay, I'm going to make it in Sketch. and then I'm going to see what it turns into in the actual application directly. So taking that idea, I made this thing called the Elm Sketch importer. So on the right-hand side, it's way too zoomed in. On the right-hand side, this is Sketch. How many people have heard of Sketch before? Basically everyone, I think. Yeah. Yeah, okay, everyone. Good. So on the right-hand side, there's Sketch, and I've also got a watcher listening to this file. And every time this file changes, which is every time you move something, then it will run Elm Sketch importer, which will turn this file into actual Elm code. So this thing over here is the Sketch file being rendered in real time in the browser instead of Sketch itself. So it basically just goes through the Sketch file, which is a fancy JSON file, pulls everything out, and then sticks it all into a gigantic Elm function. And through enabling designers to directly see their designs in the web with some real code that developers can work with, then they can test it out in different environments without needing to wait on the developer. They unblock themselves by not needing to wait for anyone anymore, basically. So that's that. For UX, unfortunately, we've got UX is a pretty hard thing to automate. You can't really come up with something which says, okay, when a click happens, I want you to automatically generate this code. But we can make tests for it. So there's a library called Elm HTML test. And recently we added something which allows you to simulate events. So for example, we have this view function, and we're gonna simulate a click on it. And what we're gonna expect that click to trigger is the message or constructor saves person. So this works really well. It also allows you to do It also allows you to do it for basically anything. So for example, if you have something with on input event, then you can send in some input, for example, cats, and you can expect the constructor to have that argument put in. This is really about helping the developer keep to the specification of the UX designer, which is okay, but I think it could be better, but I'll explain that in a minute. Okay. So lastly, before just talking with you guys, I wanted to lay out a bit of a roadmap for these things, because I would really like help. So it kind of sucks if you just do everything by yourself, because then nobody else knows how to do the things that you made, and then when you disappear, nobody knows how to maintain your stuff. So if any of you are looking to get involved with an Elm project, or looking to help Elm open source stuff in any way, then please talk to me about this stuff. But the roadmap for Elm debug decoders is pretty simple. I want to color code the decoded objects. So what I mean by that is, say that we have a gigantic JSON blob, and we have all these decoders. Right now, all we can see is the two decoders which pass for this blob. But instead, what I want to be able to do is to go through all the JSON fields and all the objects inside, and run every single one of these decoders against that, and then color code this JSON blob with the things that pass. So right now, this should be green, because these things are green. And the basic idea there is that you can just paste in any JSON you want, and you can see which bits map to which bits. So instead of having something with 20 fields and you don't know what's going to where, instead you have something which clearly says, okay, this is a category, this is an article, this is an image, this is a map. This should be pretty simple to do. and it should be extremely fun to do. So if anyone wants something simple enough and fun to do, then please talk to me about that. For Elm HTML Press, this is a far more ambitious roadmap. I would essentially like to create something that would allow you to turn events described by a UX person into actual Elm events, and also create tests for those based on something. So this is like entirely up in the air. I've got some ideas on how to do this, but I would really like if someone would wanted to look into that. And then for Elm Sketch Importer, which is the more ambitious stuff that I want to do, I was speaking to a designer the other day, and they were talking about how they make a sketch file, and then the developers go away and implement that sketch file. There's 20 tiny little changes, and they don't get to see it. But if they're going to make it fit to what the developer made, they have to go through and change all the 20 little things. But I know there's no reason why they have to do that by hand. It's entirely possible to generate a sketch file from Elm View code. So if we could do that again, then we don't have to have this mismatch where the developers get to have pull requests, but designers and developers have to have what are these called, magnifying glasses every time someone makes a change, and they don't need to go and change things by hand. So that one should be fun. So that maps into create sketch files from Elm code. Another thing is that there's quite a few elements that aren't supported, but they are mostly to do with layers. So stuff like artboards, if you have multiple artboards in a group, then that's not currently supported, and that would be great to be added. The code for this is incredibly simple. It's basically 300 lines of decoders or parsers for the JSON stuff, and then one code for turning that into Elm. And then the other idea that I was speaking to a designer about is that the designer is working on making designs for someone who uses a lot of components. So say that you have 20 sketch files, and in those sketch files you have 100 components. It should be possible, based on the way that you group each one of those components, to generate a view function. So you might have a group called view username or something like that. The idea is that it's entirely possible to go through the sketch files, find those groups, and turn those into Elm functions. So if you have some, yeah, so that's basically it. Yeah, that's all I really have to say. Please talk to me. I'm very eager to hear what the Barcelona people are up to with Elm. Or if you aren't using Elm for something, then I want to convince you to use something for Elm for something. And if you want to help out with any of these, that I will do everything in my power to enable you to do that. So yeah, that's it. That's me, and thank you.
It feels like I missed the most interesting part of that presentation when I had to step out for like 2 seconds. So
I think you missed this bit possibly.
Yeah. So could you talk me through? Sorry, I'm being very selfish here. But can you talk me through that again?
Yeah. So on the right-hand side we have the sketch editor. On the left-hand side, this is the web browser. I've created a tool which allows you to take a sketch file and turn it into Elm code, which is then rendered in the browser. And the basic premise is that you shouldn't have to write all this stuff by hand. You should be able to automate creating something real that the designers can actually test out in the browser instead of just in Sketch. So this tool is watching the sketch file right now, and that's why it's automatically changing over here. Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, so this stuff is very interesting for me because we obviously a lot of the bread and butter of the book of everyone is taking designs and making them, turning them into code and getting them so that they're printable and beautiful and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And it's quite nice because as the demo is kind of leading to it's a fixed view. There's none of that responsive business and all the rest of it. And for us, that's fairly important because we just print on a single page, and you can't really get responsive physical books. So it works perfectly for us, really. And it you know, from a demo perspective, it seems to be solving a lot of our problems. What are the limitations of this at the moment that you're finding?
So let's see. So the main limitations right now is that I can actually show the code base for this. Sketch for it. Yeah. So the main limitation right now, and the reason why it's not 1.0 yet, is simply because it doesn't fully support all the possible things that you can do in Sketch. So it doesn't support borders, it doesn't support border control, it doesn't properly support groups. It supports slices, but only one type of slice. And it does some weird stuff with text. And essentially, this file is even less than 300 lines. But this file, all it does is go through and decode the JSON stuff that the Sketch stuff is stored in. And this needs to be added to cover all those possible cases. So you can see right now, slice is imported, is unsupported rather, and shape groups aren't supported properly either. So that's the main limitation right now. Eventually, the main limitation will be the fact that it isn't responsive. So the fact that it's converting fixed width things to fixed width things is actually a flaw in the method I'm doing right now. It should be responsive because when a designer is looking at something they made, then they care about it being responsive. They don't care about it being static because they can look at that in Sketch, and that doesn't change from platform to platform. But seeing how something changes when the screen size changes is very important to mobile designers, at least, who are focusing on web first. But fixed generated stuff could also be an option, like a flag kind of. The long-term, the very long-term limitation is probably going to be that right now it doesn't generate code that you would want to check in, simply because it generates one big blob instead of small functions. And that's where the grouping things into view functions or components, but not really components, comes in, because imagine that these two things should be connected. Then really what you want is a view function for just those two things, rather than having it in the same stuff as all of this, if that makes sense. Yeah, but those are all fixable problems. It just requires manpower. Yeah.
And what does it actually generate?
Yeah, so I don't think I have a local example. Maybe I do. No, that's not right either. Yeah, I don't have a local example actually, but it just generates a giant Elm function. So it's just like a main, which is HTML, and then it generates like a top level div, and then inside there it generates image or text or whatever the inside stuff is.
Okay. Have you thought about targeting, something else other than HTML and divs?
What do you mean by targeting something else?
Sketch.
Back to Sketch.
Sorry, I'm not Sketch. SVG or Canvas or SVG, for example.
Canvas, no, because there's not really a good way of doing Canvas stuff in Elm. Or there is, but it's not very good if you ask me. But SVG could be done. I hadn't really thought about that because none of the designers I know use SVG, like they're all making web stuff basically. But there's no reason why it couldn't, and that could be pretty trivial to do, I think. Like the main rendering function for this thing is file runtime. I think it should be file. It's basically, what's that, 60 lines? Yeah, so 60 lines is all the renderer is. And there's no reason why that renderer couldn't be just changed to SVG. For example, you just change this to be SVG at the top level. No, that's, but anyway, yes, that could be possible and it should be trivial.
Okay.
I would estimate less than 20 minutes. So, yeah.
That's a developer estimate, right?
Yeah, but my developer estimates are good when it comes to these kind of things. But anything past 2 hours is like way off.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's me for questions. Anybody else for questions?
Well, I have one on a broader Elm sort of tack. So Elm at the moment feels very much like an exercise in minimalism in terms of the language. And I wonder what your opinion is on abstraction, and do you feel that Elm is going to need a little bit more abstraction? Or
so is the question is, why doesn't Elm have typecasters?
It's kind of, but I'm not a Haskell person, so I've been using Elm day in, day out for a year, and there's definitely things where I feel like there should be an abstraction here, but I can't do it at the moment.
So I think there's a couple of things that abstractions like typecasters help with. Does everyone know what a typecast is? Does anyone not know what a typecast is? Okay, a typecast is basically like an interface in Java, or like it's a way of, not really, but it's it's like a way of saying this data structure has these functions that it works with. So for example, you might have map for a list, where you have a function that maps something to something else, and then you can map it over a list because a list has something, and then it can be a list of something else. Or you might have like a different data structure, like a maybe like an optional type, where an optional type has optional A, and then you map it to B, and then it turns into optional B. So a typecast is basically a way of saying a list conforms to a mappable thing, or a maybe maybe or an optional is a mappable thing. So in Elm, we don't have that at all right now. There's no way of saying that if you make a list implementation, that it has to have a map function, or that it is a mappable thing. Generally, right now, that's not so much of an issue, because I think there's not really enough need for it in terms of data structures. So like, there's not alternative listings that need to be. So in Haskell, it makes sense where you have 5 different types of map lists. So you might have one which is super fast for binary or super fast for integers, and then it conforms to a mappable thing or a list typecast. But in Elm, we don't really need that because we're targeting such a high-level thing. We're not caring about how the bytes are stored internally so much.
So I've got an example from Mike, which unfortunately I kind of had to launch into like almost at the start when I started with them, but it's a store which sits on top of a. We're using Phoenix on the back end, so it communicates over channels.
Yeah.
And the store handles things like latency compensation, so any communication with the server goes through the store. And because, or maybe because I haven't found the right approach, but seemingly there doesn't seem to be a way to abstract lots of the steps which are involved in each of those operations. So like maybe add person, add project, all of these things have separate functions, and in all of the steps through the whole pipeline each have to have their own.
Yeah. So there are two cases where I think something like that kind of abstraction would be helpful. So the first one is that case where you have some common functions or common data structures that should all conform to the same way. And then you don't want to forget to implement something, or you want to make sure that it all behaves the same way because then you can use the same functions.
Or if you want to change it.
Or you want to change it. Yeah. So that I think is a really good case, but I don't think it's a strong, a compelling enough case to justify introducing type classes, which are kind of complicated into Elm. But
would you see that as something which you might push into a effect manager? Would that make more sense?
No.
But how would you deal with that particular case?
I would just write the functions. I would just keep.
You would just pay the cost and.
I avoid pushing anything into effect managers where possible, basically. And then the other case where type classes are useful is for stuff like making a custom equality operation or making JSON decoders without needing to handwrite them. So there are some things like you might want to define how set equality works, or you might have an ordered set where the order of things that come out of the set are important rather than how it is stored internally. If that makes sense. Then you want to be able to define, okay, this is how equality works. It's going to go through all the elements in the set in this order and compare them. But in Elm right now, you can't do that because the equality function is a runtime thing. And so equality just works by checking objects in a very convoluted way, almost. So then type classes would be good because then you can define how equality works for your thing. But I don't think type classes is the answer to that. But I think they're a simplified thing which applies only to data modules or something. Like, Cool. Any other questions?
Got any idea when the next release is happening?
No, it wasn't going to be last month.
There was never a date mentioned,
timeline.
But been teasing for a while.
It's going to be soon. I would listen closely for the next, let's see, for the end of this month, then I would listen closely, but there's no guarantees. Because in Elm, the way releases work is that it gets released when it's ready. So by having a fixed timeline and releasing before then is not such a good idea, at least in the eyes of Elm, because every time a release is pushed, all the features in that release have to be good things. Whereas in something like Rust, they are very free to just put whatever in. For example, 5 different ways of dealing with pointers. And then they say, oh, wait, actually, that's super confusing, and now let's remove it. Whereas in Elm, the approach we like to take is, do we actually need 5 different ways of doing pointers, or is one good enough? Or can one cover all these cases? So we try to avoid pushing releases too early, at least in, Any other questions?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, normally we head over to a bar and have a couple of drinks.